The unemployment rate in South Africa has increased to 27.6% in the first quarter of this year. Now, the figure is up half a percentage point from the end of 2018. Employment law specialist Professor Hugo Pienaar joins us now to discuss this. Prof, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. I don't want us to dwell on the numbers. I think everyone has been talking about them the whole day. I think the question here is what can actually be done. I had COSATU a little earlier that was blaming the government, but also blaming the private sector, which they say are on an investment strike, but also the government, they say, for not doing enough to actually make sure that they leverage on the concessions that they have been making to business over the years.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think the important point is not to have, we can't have a blame game now. It's time to act. I'm not advocating, well, all three parties in the social accord. I'm not advocating exploitation of labor. I'm not advocating that we go back to what South Korea did in the previous century, where business leaders were imprisoned and strangled some sort of concessions out of them. What I think the starting point is, and it actually starts long before that, but at least look at the social accord, what they did in Ireland at the time in the 90s, and what they achieved. Now, what that meant is that the three major role players came together. Government on the one side, unions on the other side, together with business. And what they then formed was a social accord. And I just made a few notes here of what one would typically expect of each of those parties, i.e. government, can we have more employment creation-friendly legislation? Not exploitation of labor, employer creation-friendly legislation. Can we provide more flexibility? The growth in the creation of work internationally lies in flexi labor, not in formal employment. When the previous legislation was introduced on this specific topic, it in fact stated in the previous report that that may create more unemployment, and it did. So can we have, for instance, 6 months no fault dismissals? Is that a possibility? Can we have, and I'm talking now from a business point of view, can we have protection against violence? For instance, why do companies settle wage negotiations? Is it about supply and demand, or is it simply because there's too much violence? And of course, business needs that protection. And often business must go to court to find protection, to get police intervention. It shouldn't be necessary for that. So let's look at government. That is, ESCOM has a role to play, but let's look at unions and businesses. And see
now, before we get to them, let's talk about the those that are specific to business, some of which you have highlighted. In the past, so many concessions were in fact made. Among the arguments that business made was that labor was inflexible, that it was costing a lot. In fact, former President Thabo Mbeki had serious problems. I mean, COSATU had problems with him. They felt that he was bending over backwards to accommodate business at their expense. But what happened? There wasn't the kind of investment that one would have expected, given the concessions that were made.
Yes.
So it's not a guarantee that business would come to the party, is it?
Well, it is an unconditional undertaking of all three parties to commit for the sake of our country, which we unconditionally need. And business may argue, but for the first time in the recent legislation, there was employer-friendly concessions, i.e. the fact that employees must have picketing rules in place before they can strike. They would argue there was none before that. But let's look at business, because they need to come to the table. Government must come to the table as an independent party, and that the emphasis is on that, because that worked in Ireland. Business must come to the table and say, end of this investment strike. We will have. And it's not all possible at the same time, but let's give an undertaking with regard to retrenchments. Because if you look at those numbers, many of those would be derived from from retrenchment. Let's look at some sort of undertaking. What will we give you in return? We can give you multi-skilling. What can unions give us in return? Let's have a democratized workplace where employees can choose whether they want to strike or not. Let's look at what happened in Ireland, and again, be careful of exploitation, is that there were wage freezes. And it worked very well for that country. There was concession bargaining. We've seen that happening where certain unions come to the table and say, in order to retain jobs, we will not take an increase this year. And it's hard for labor. They don't earn a lot of money.
But I mean, given the huge, salary disparities,
yes,
and inequalities, can really labor be expected to agree to something like that without the issue of disparities being addressed?
Unless there's concessions by all parties, we will not have an answer to this.
But do you see the captains of industry saying, okay, we're prepared to take massive cuts?
I see what may happen is that you should have productivity bargaining so that people would be in the position to increase their wages. And that will address to a certain extent the wage gap. So one must allow for that, but you need the flexibility in the labor market for that, and we don't have enough flexibility.
But what would a person have done to earn something like 87 million rands?
Well, yeah, again, that's potentially a debate for another day, but if the argument would simply be, I would think, and business can defend that, if they want to say, what has this person added to the bottom line of the company? Personally, I think that what has transpired in the past is that business leaders would get huge production bonuses without delivering the goods. That's equally wrong. But if we go back and keep on blaming,
let's just say you do deliver the goods, but that's an insane amount
I
of
can't
money
think that
compared
somebody
to a worker who has to earn like 3,000 rand.
How do you expect a worker to understand that? I'm with you on that. But what I'm saying is that where they need to start is to say, let's draw a line in the sand. Let's not have the blame game here. It's not going to help. Let's look at what has worked in the past historically in other countries. And I'm using one example, i.e. the social accord in Ireland. And they derived huge benefits from that. And we need to start with that. And then, let's look at the Netherlands, for instance. They say that at year one of your employment, you don't get any benefits. You just have a basic pay. Year two, you derive more benefits. Only in year four, you derive the full complement of benefits. We need to become more flexible with regard to that, because it must make it more attractive for people to be employed. Now, I'm saying the union should be part of that, but remember, the union does not carry the constituency of the unemployed. That's actually a different constituency.
In fact, in the past, your COSATUs have actually been referred to as an aristocracy of labor, precisely because they were not speaking on behalf of those.
But yeah, they don't carry that constituency. And ultimately, the more barriers you put in place, the more difficult it is for the unemployed to get into the employment sector. Once you're in the employment sector, you have social benefits, you have unemployment benefits. But until you get there, you have nothing. And we already have an environment where one person has to provide for 8 or 10 dependents. And now we have the youth unemployment escalating, probably the highest in the world, closer to Brazil's at the moment. So we're not in a position where we should blame. We must find answers now.
That's what we're going to look for tonight. But let's keep these conversations going. Thanks very much, Prof. Director of Employment Practice at Cliff Decker Hofmeyr, Professor Hugo Pienaar. We'll have more on this story with Devon in Business a little later on tonight.